Everyone at the party had their mouths open when I revealed that my wife was cheating on me with her boss. They tried to deny it, to claim that it was an exaggeration, but the words evaporated when the screen illuminated the raw and painful truth. There, projected for everyone to see, was her image, the woman who promised to love me, kissing him secretly at work, smiling like someone who carried no guilt, like someone who believed she would never be discovered. I still remember the muffled sound of nervous laughter turning into murmurs of shock. I remember the averted looks, the shame of others permeating the air as the perfect mask she wore crumbled in front of everyone. At that moment, I wasn't just a betrayed man, I was the very personification of public humiliation, and yet, with my heart shattered in my chest, I didn't lower my head. I needed her to feel even a tenth of the pain that shot through me like invisible blades. She stood still, pale, as if the life had escaped her body. The boss, on the other side of the party, pretended to be calm that he didn't have, trying to look for explanations that wouldn't come. I left no room for excuses. The party, once full of music, laughter and toasts, became a silent court where everyone was a judge and she, without the right to defense, received the crushing weight of the judgment. And yet, even seeing everything, even with the clear and unquestionable images, there were those who murmured, "Was that really all it was? Isn't he exaggerating?" As if the betrayal needed context, as if there were some plausible excuse for what I saw, for what I experienced. I remember staring at her, expecting, perhaps, a reaction, an apology, a sincere breakdown, but all I saw was a blank expression, a mix of fear and selfishness, her fear of being discovered, not of what she did to me. Then, amid the suffocating silence, when it seemed like nothing could get worse, an even more devastating turn of events exploded at the party. The boss's wife, 8 months pregnant, appeared without warning, dragging her heavy belly through the entrance to the ballroom, attracted by the rumors that were spreading like wildfire. She stared at the screen, eyes wide with horror, and I swear time stopped. The look she gave her husband and my wife was the final stab that buried us all in shame. I could hear the whispers growing, the poisoned words spreading in waves. They destroyed 2 families. She betrayed a man who gave his life for her, he betrayed the woman who carried his child. The party became an emotional battlefield where no one knew where to look, who to apologize to, who to support. And at the center of it all was me, trying to breathe among the wreckage of my own story, trying to understand how someone who once swore to love me was able to tear me apart with such coldness. I remember the sweaty hands, the cold sweat running down my back, the absurd desire to run away, but something inside me, something broken and furious, kept me standing. I needed her to see. I needed everyone to see. The truth, naked and raw, without filters, without excuses. Because betrayal is not just the act of betraying, it is the disregard for the love given, it is the silent murder of the trust built over the years. And when I looked around, I saw not only strangers judging her, but also people looking at me with pity, as if my pain were a grotesque spectacle they couldn't look away from. She tried to get closer to me, her mouth trembling, unable to form coherent words, her lover running after his pregnant wife who burst into tears in front of everyone. A theater of horrors that no one would ever forget. She mumbled something about regret, about confusion, but all I heard was the echo of the laughter she shared with him on the sly. All I felt was the pain of the touch she reserved for another while I waited for her at home, naively believing I was loved, respected, chosen. There are no words that describe the feeling of becoming a stranger to the person you trusted most. Suddenly, every happy memory turns to poison, every memory twists into something dirty, something that eats away from the inside out. And there, in the midst of that hell of looks and whispers, I understood that it wasn't just my marriage that had ended, it was a part of me that had died. The part that believed in forever, the part that threw itself into empty promises with its eyes closed. And yet, at the bottom of my ruin, there was something that no one there knew, something that would change everything once again, something that neither she, nor the boss, nor the betrayed wife could imagine. Because life sometimes has its own cruel ways of settling scores. Something so unexpected, so devastating, that it would transform pain into justice, betrayal into condemnation. They thought they had escaped, that they could move on, erase the evidence, rewrite history. But what no one knew was that the worst was yet to come. The blow that would end their perfect masks once and for all and destroy everything they had tried to build on lies and deceit. And now, while everyone at the party was still trying to piece together the shame spread across the room, while she cried, while he begged, while his pregnant wife tried to breathe between sobs, I watched in silence, already knowing what was about to happen, something that would make all that pain worth it. Something that would leave everyone, absolutely everyone, speechless. Welcome to the channel. Here, we never support any type of betrayal. The stories you will hear are completely fictional, created to show how infidelity destroys lives, corrodes feelings and devastates families. Each narrative carries a profound lesson: betrayal never pays. Get ready, because what comes next is a shocking story that will stir your emotions. Good story. David had always been a man who believed in patiently building a home. From a young age, he had the dream of forming a solid family, a dream that seemed to have come true the day he met Laura. She had appeared in his life as a breath of renewal, a woman with an easy smile and a vibrant soul who seemed to understand the lightness and depth of love like few others. Laura, with her intense eyes and captivating way of seeing beauty in small things, brought David not just passion, but hope for a life shared in harmony. He, in turn, found in her a reason to grow, to build something that transcended the ordinary. The union of the two was quick, but not hasty. A natural force seemed to push them forward, as if they were two pieces made to fit together. In just a few months, they were already sharing not only promises, but also life projects, dreams sewn together in silent plans that drove them daily. David and Laura's wedding was celebrated in a simple setting, yet full of genuine emotion. The promises exchanged at that modest altar had a weight that they both felt deep in their chests, as if each word sealed something immense and definitive. The first years were intense, full of short trips, lazy afternoons at home and laughter exchanged between hugs and knowing looks. David dedicated himself tirelessly to his work at a growing technology company, believing that today's effort would ensure tomorrow's comfort. Laura, a marketing graduate, built her career with the same determination, gaining respect in the corporate environment while keeping the flame of lightness that defined her so much alive. They were, in everyone's eyes, the perfect couple, balanced, in love and, above all, partners. A partnership that, for David, was unbreakable, something that neither time nor everyday difficulties could threaten. The apartment they shared for years was more than a home, it was a reflection of who they were together. Each object carried a story, each wall seemed to be impregnated with silent memories that told of sleepless nights making plans, of lazy Sundays when the greatest joy was sharing an impromptu coffee on the sofa. David was proud of the life they were building, not because of the material goods or professional successes, but because of the peace he felt when he arrived home and found Laura's smile waiting for him. For him, there was no greater victory than seeing the sparkle in her eyes when she told him about an achievement at work or when she opened a wine to celebrate a small everyday joy. Over time, life demanded more of them. Responsibilities increased, schedules became tighter, and routine began to dictate rules that were previously just suggestions. Still, David remained firm in his conviction that the love that united them was stronger than any setback. He believed that, despite the tiredness, despite the busy days and quick conversations in the middle of busy schedules, the essentials remained intact. Laura seemed to follow this pace with the same ease as always, balancing work and personal life with a skill that David deeply admired. She had been promoted to a prominent position within the company, now reporting directly to the board, and he couldn't be more proud. Her achievements were, to David, their achievements, everything was part of the life they were building side by side. Close friends commented, over glasses of wine and occasional dinners, how rare it was to see a couple so aligned, so comfortable in each other's presence. For David, these comments were just external confirmation of what he already knew deep down: he had found the woman of his life. There was no room for doubt in his heart. Laura's every gesture, every look, every touch, reinforced her certainty that they were on the right path. He loved her with a raw sincerity, the kind that doesn't require proof or guarantees because it can be felt in the breath, in the silence shared without discomfort. And even though the work demanded more and more of them, David tried to keep alive the small traditions that connected them, a special dinner here, a weekend getaway there, a letter left in the drawer for her to find on a difficult day. Over the years, natural changes emerged. Laura seemed more involved with her responsibilities at work, more absent in the small moments of everyday life. David, although he noticed these subtle changes, did not allow insecurity to dominate him. He attributed everything to the demanding phase they were both going through professionally, convinced that true love is also made of patience, of blind trust in the bonds built over the years. When Laura arrived late from work, tired and often distracted, David greeted her with understanding, trying to ease her burden, offering silence when she needed it and company when she allowed it. For him, it was just another phase, a passing storm before new sunny days. Building a home, David thought, was made up of precisely these phases, these ups and downs that test the solidity of the base. It never occurred to him to doubt the love he believed was reciprocal. He never imagined that her smile could hide anything other than tiredness. And, perhaps because of this unshakable faith, he never looked for clues, never dwelled too much on absences or vague excuses. The confidence he felt was so solid that not even the growing emotional distance, nor the small contradictions in Laura's accounts of her days, could immediately shake him. David clung to the memories of good times, the promises made at the altar, the affection that, although rarer, still appeared in sporadic gestures, like an unexpected caress or a forgotten note on the bed. The weekends became quieter, filled with work commitments that Laura was unable to postpone, unexpected meetings, short trips to corporate events that, according to her, were essential. David, as much as he felt the absence of the woman with whom he used to share entire afternoons of small talk and complicit glances, never expressed any complaints. Deep down, he believed that supporting Laura in her career was part of the love he professed. He understood that her success was also the result of their efforts, their silent support, their encouragement on difficult days. And so, the days became weeks, and the weeks, months. The house that previously seemed to overflow with life now had spaces of silence, moments of solitude camouflaged by busy schedules. Even so, David continued to plan surprises, small trips, special nights that could rekindle the flame that he refused to see diminished. He dreamed of new beginnings, of new phases of enchantment, certain that every true marriage goes through moments of wear and tear, but that genuine love always prevails. Within David's heart, hope was a stubborn flame, refusing to be extinguished even in the face of the cold wind of indifference. He knew that love also meant enduring difficult moments, understanding silences, respecting spaces. It never crossed his mind that he could be betrayed, that the love he cultivated so much could be used as a shield to hide secrets that he didn't even imagine existed. For David, Laura was his life partner, his right choice in a world of uncertainty. And nothing, absolutely nothing, seemed capable of changing that conviction. But the truth has a cruel way of infiltrating the cracks of the most solid certainties. Small details that previously went unnoticed began to weigh on her mind, messages that she hastily deleted when she saw him approach, the hesitation in answering simple questions, the rush to avoid long eye contacts. Still, David chose trust. I chose love. I chose to believe that, above all, they were partners, allies, lovers and friends. He chose to ignore the growing discomfort in his chest, drowning his doubts in rational justifications, preserving the perfect image he carried of her and them. In those days before the illusion broke, David lived in a reality manufactured by the strength of his own love, unable to realize that the abyss between them grew day by day. While he dreamed of new beginnings, Laura seemed to dream alone. And what should be just another company anniversary, an innocent celebration of professional achievements, would be the stage for a revelation that would change their lives forever. David spent days planning the perfect surprise for Laura. I felt like they needed something to rekindle their connection, something to remind them of who they were before life pulled them in opposite directions. He organized everything in secret, a short trip, a charming house in the countryside, away from the hustle and bustle, away from distractions. I imagined the two of them finding that safe space where love seemed to grow effortlessly. She worked extra hard to be able to leave without guilt, she personally chose every detail, from the wine she liked so much to the songs that used to rock her lighter nights. When she finally told her about the surprise, Laura's eyes lit up, but it only lasted for a moment. There was a strange glow there, an almost imperceptible hesitation, as if opposing wills were fighting within her. She smiled, accepted the invitation, but asked to postpone it for a few weeks, citing unavoidable commitments at work. David, understanding as always, accepted without question, although an uncomfortable pang began to form inside him, silent and treacherous. The weeks that followed felt like walking on a thread that was stretched too thin. Laura was increasingly distant, absorbed in phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room, in hastily typed messages, always with plausible justifications on the tip of her tongue. David tried hard not to fall into traps of distrust. He repeated to himself that love also meant trusting in the other's silence, in the absence of immediate answers. But the little signs began to accumulate in an invisible pile that he tried to ignore: the sudden mood swings, the new clothes she said she bought on flash sales, the smiles that seemed addressed to someone other than him. Still, every time Laura cuddled into his chest, even for seconds, David found the strength to believe they were just going through a phase. The founding anniversary of the company where Laura worked emerged as a major event, a grandiose celebration that she described with unusual enthusiasm. There would be live music, a fancy dinner, speeches from the directors. It was, according to her, the perfect occasion to celebrate not only their professional achievements, but also the strength of the team they formed. Laura wanted David to go, insisted with sweet words and looks that seemed genuine. He felt flattered, excited even, as if this was a sign that things were falling into place. She carefully chose her clothes, planned to arrive in advance so they could enjoy the night together, share that space that, at times, seemed to belong to different worlds. On the night of the party, the room was overflowing with energy and practiced smiles. The impeccable decor and the expensive perfume in the air created a scene of apparent perfection. David observed everything with attentive eyes, trying not to feel out of place in that environment which, despite its cordiality, seemed artificial to him. Laura circulated with ease among her colleagues, her smile bright, her posture impeccable. From afar, he admired that woman who still touched his heart, that woman who seemed to belong to that elegant and fast-moving world that he was never able to fully follow. While talking to some acquaintances, his gaze searched her instinctively, like a shipwrecked man searching for dry land. It was during a toast that something finally broke the thin layer of illusion. He saw Laura laughing, her head thrown back, her hand resting casually on the arm of a man he didn't yet know. The gesture, in itself, didn't mean anything concrete, it could just be another friendly interaction at a party full of social protocols. But there was something in the way she looked at him, something too intimate to ignore. The way her body leaned toward him, as if the world around her had disappeared, ignited in David a suspicion as sudden as it was painful. Still, he preferred to attribute it to his own insecurity. He didn't want to be the type of man who saw betrayal in every smile. The night progressed, and Laura seemed more and more distant. Conversations were quickly cut off, furtive glances became more frequent. David tried to ignore the discomfort, tried to focus on the small kindnesses she still offered him, but it was like trying to get sand between his fingers. Until, at a certain point, when she said that she needed to resolve something with the organizing team, David, without knowing exactly why, felt the impulse to follow her with his gaze. Crossing the crowd with the lightness of someone not expecting to be followed, she disappeared through a side door, the man with the knowing smile following a few steps behind. David's heart pounded in his chest. Against all common sense, against all dignity, he found himself walking towards that door, driven by a force he could not control. He passed discreetly through the entrance, the sounds of the party muffled by the thick walls. He advanced down a dimly lit corridor, guided by the echoes of hurried footsteps and muffled whispers. What he found around the corner was a scene that he could never forget, even if he tried until the last day of his life. Laura was there, leaning against the wall, his body overlapping hers, their faces pressed together, their hands intertwined in gestures too intimate for any innocent explanation. There was no doubt, there was no room for interpretation. It was betrayal, naked, raw and brutal. It was the destruction of everything David had believed in, built, protected. A punch to the stomach that knocked the air out of him, that crushed his chest in a dull, paralyzing pain. He didn't know how long he stood there, motionless, watching what seemed like a scene from some twisted nightmare. There was no shouting, there were no immediate confrontations. Just an icy silence, a space between two worlds that would never touch again. David turned, walked back to the party as if his feet were made of lead. Each step was an enormous effort not to collapse, not to let the pain consume him right there, in front of everyone. The music, the laughter, the conversations, everything seemed grotesquely out of place now. He needed to act. Not with violence, not with words spoken in the heat of the moment, but with the cruel clarity that only betrayal allows. David met the person responsible for organizing the party and asked for the screen to be released for a surprise tribute that, according to him, would end the night on an emotional note. With the silent authority of someone who no longer has anything to lose, he ensured that the request was granted without question. As the file loaded, as the room prepared to receive the revelation that would shatter that facade of perfection, David felt a strange serenity invade his chest. As if, in the midst of chaos, he had finally found an undeniable truth, something that would free him from doubts, from vain hopes. He watched as the screen came to life, as the images began to project, and then, as everyone's faces turned curiously to the presentation, the true story began to be told before everyone. The party fell silent. A second of surprise, then collective shock. Laura, captured in images as clear as daggers, entwined with her lover, betraying not only David's trust but also the public image she had so carefully cultivated. Whispers, looks of astonishment, murmurs of disbelief echoed through the hall. Laura tried to run, tried to put out the fire that was spreading too quickly, but it was too late. The damage was done. And in the midst of the awkward silence, the shame that spread like thick smoke, a new movement appeared at the entrance to the room, something that would forever change the course of that night, something that no one there had yet imagined. The door to the hall was pushed hard, causing everyone who was still trying to understand what they saw on the screen to turn around. A dense, almost palpable silence settled in the room when a woman, visibly shaken, entered. His eyes watered, his expression hardened, his breathing heavy. She brought with her a presence so impactful that it seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. And in her round belly, beneath her tight blue dress, was living proof of a story that no one there fully knew. The boss's wife, 8 months pregnant, advanced with firm steps towards the center of the room, as if each step was driven by a force that came from a deep place, a place where pain turns into a hurricane. David didn't need to hear a single word to understand the devastation that was spreading. It was enough to see the terror on Laura and her lover's faces to know that the betrayal she had suffered was just the tip of an even deeper abyss. The boss, pale as a corpse, took 2 hesitant steps towards the pregnant woman, mumbling her name, his trembling hands raised in a pathetic gesture of someone trying to contain the inevitable. She looked at him with a look that was fire and steel at the same time. Without screaming, without crying, without losing her dignity, she said, in a voice firm enough to carry across the entire room, that she had known everything for weeks, that she had proof, messages, photos, that she had endured the knowledge silently because she believed that the child she was carrying deserved to be born in peace. Her words, although spoken in a calm tone, had the weight of hammering in the chest of everyone who heard. Laura tried to get closer, her voice choked, muttering silly excuses, but was repelled with a simple gesture of her hand, as if her presence were something unbearable. David observed everything with cruel lucidity, feeling within himself a poisonous mixture of compassion and bitter satisfaction. He understood the woman, understood every fiber of her contained hatred, because it was the same thing that burned inside him. The boss tried to explain himself, promised that it was just a mistake, a confusion of feelings, that everything would be different now that the baby was coming. But the woman, with her belly prominent between them, just smiled sadly, like someone looking at something that had already died a long time ago, and replied that there would be no forgiveness, that what he destroyed could not be rebuilt even with 1,000 regrets, that the son she carried would not need a father who betrayed a family on impulse. Tension spiraled in the air like a storm about to explode. David, still not moving from the corner where he watched everything, felt his breathing heavy, his heart pounding in a strange rhythm between pain and release. Laura was crying now, thick tears streaming down her face, begging her boss to say something, to defend her, to alleviate the scandal. But he, cowardly to the last thread of dignity he had left, verbally pushed her under the weight of responsibility, saying that everything had been her fault, that she had provoked him, that he would never have gotten involved if she hadn't insisted so much. The audience watched in absolute silence, as if everyone there was trapped in a web of shared shame. David felt the words pierce his mind like stilettos. It wasn't just carnal betrayal, it was the betrayal of everything they built, of every gesture, every promise, every shared moment. Laura was now alone in the center of the room, facing the reality of her choices with no one to turn to. There were no excuses that could sew together the torn fabric of the image she had cultivated for so long. There were no words that could rebuild the confidence crushed under the feet of ambition and selfishness. The pregnant wife, with an almost superhuman dignity, looked at Laura as if observing something irretrievably lost. She said that betrayal had not only destroyed a marriage, it had robbed her of the hope of building a complete family for her unborn child. He said that, even in silence, even knowing about the betrayal, he had tried to believe that he could face the future with some shadow of love. But now, in front of everyone, she chose something else, she chose herself, she chose her son, she chose not to bear the shame of a marriage made of lies. Her every word was like a manifesto of strength and rebirth, and even those who had previously tried to find justification for Laura now looked away, unable to bear the raw truth unfolding there. Laura, defeated, murmured that it hadn't been premeditated, that she hadn't planned anything, that everything happened unintentionally. But his words sounded hollow, soulless, without conviction. David knew that it didn't matter how it all started. It only mattered that she had chosen, in each moment, to continue. Choosing to look at him at night, to lie next to him, to kiss him on the forehead while nurturing another secret life. And now, that secret life was collapsing under the crushing weight of his own lies. The boss, seeing himself cornered, tried to get closer to his wife, promising change, crying, humiliating himself in front of everyone. But she just shook her head, calmly, and said that she had already taken all the necessary steps. That morning, he had handed in the divorce petition, and that he could keep everything he valued so much, the titles, the positions, the brilliant meetings. She would keep what really mattered, her dignity, her freedom and the son she was carrying, free from the weight of shame. David felt an unknown emotion tighten in his chest. It was like watching a rotten empire fall. It was like seeing the truth win over the lie, even if the price was too high to be celebrated. When the woman finally turned and left the room, everyone's eyes still fixed on her like moths fascinated by the light of a fire, David knew that nothing more could be said. Nothing Laura tried to do or say could erase what had been revealed. Laura tried to get closer to David, sobbing, trying to touch his arm, but he instinctively backed away, as if his own body rejected that contact. She whispered that she loved him, that it had all been a mistake, that he was the only one who really mattered. But David looked at her and saw, for the first time, not the woman he loved, but the stranger who had destroyed his home with her own hands. Without raising his voice, without creating another scene, he just said that there was nothing left there to be saved. That love, once corrupted by betrayal, could not be resurrected by empty tears. The hall, once full of laughter and celebration, now seemed like a mausoleum of broken dreams. David left the place with firm steps, feeling the weight of each look that followed him, feeling the crumbling of his story, but also a strange freedom emerging from among the rubble. Behind him, Laura was surrounded only by her own ghosts, her own mistakes, her own regrets. There was still a lot to happen. There would still be more developments, more truths to be faced. But in that moment, in that instant frozen between the past and the future, David knew that something inside him had changed forever. And that, despite the pain, the worst part was yet to come. David walked out of the room without looking back. His firm steps crossed the parking lot, now semi-closed by the silence of the dawn that was beginning to fall. Each step seemed to free him from an invisible chain, although inside his soul still bled, throbbing with the recent memory of public humiliation. He felt his cheeks burn, not from shame, but from the sheer force of his newfound betrayal, as if something vital had been ripped from within him. The cool night enveloped him, and for a moment he closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to find some fragment of himself among the scattered shards of his life. Laura followed him out a few minutes later. She didn't run, she didn't scream, but she walked quickly, stumbling over her own steps, overwhelmed by the pain that was now also hers. He called his name once, twice, 3 times, until David stopped, still with his back turned, without the courage to look again at that face that carried all his disappointments. She approached slowly, and for a moment they both stood still in the dim light of a streetlight, surrounded only by the solitude of the moment. Her voice broke the silence like a thread about to snap, choked, scratchy from holding back tears. She said she was sorry, that she never wanted things to get to that point, that she had let herself be carried away by lack, by emptiness, by a weakness that now consumed her. David turned then, and the expression on his face was so cold and distant that Laura shivered. He didn't scream, he didn't accuse, he didn't ask for explanations. He just asked, with deadly serenity, how many times she looked him in the eye knowing he was lying, how many times she smiled knowing she was spitting poison at the roots of what they built. Laura didn't respond immediately, the tears were flowing freely now, mixing with the whispered words that could barely form complete sentences. He spoke of regret, he spoke of love, he spoke of the fear of losing what was left. David listened to everything as if the words were coming from far away, echoing in a space where there was no longer enough faith to reach them. They stood there, still, for what seemed like a suspended time. Laura tried to get closer once again, trying to touch his hand, but he backed away, his gaze filled with a sadness that crushed her more than any scream could have done. She said, with a firm voice and without hesitation, that she had chosen her path and that now she would have to walk it alone. There was no longer room for empty promises, for fragile reconstructions on top of ruins. He said that trust, once broken, cannot be mended with words, nor with tears, and that, even though there was still love, respect, that invisible and vital foundation, was dead. The night enveloped them like a silent witness. David turned around again and walked to his car, feeling the weight of her gaze on his back, but he didn't allow his heart to weaken. He got into the vehicle, closed the door and remained silent for a few seconds, observing his own reflection in the rearview mirror, trying to recognize himself in that broken man. When he drove off, he caught a glimpse of Laura falling to her knees on the ground in the parking lot, overcome by a despair that now no longer reached him. He sped up and left, taking with him only what remained of his dignity. In the hours that followed, he drove aimlessly, crossing empty streets and deserted avenues, trying to organize the storm inside his mind. I thought about the nights shared, about the dreams built and now shattered. I thought about the irony of having loved someone so much who, in the end, was capable of hurting him with such cruelty. I also thought about the son who would be born without a home, about the woman who had to face a room full of strangers to expose her pain. The world seemed to spin on a strange and uneven axis, where nothing made sense anymore. Dawn was beginning to turn the sky pale when David parked the car in front of the small hotel where he had hastily booked a room. I didn't want to go back home, to that bed that now seemed dirty, to those walls impregnated with lies. He needed distance, silence, time to gather his own crumbs. In the bedroom, he threw himself into the armchair by the window and remained there, motionless, watching the city awaken while the weight of the night still pulsed in his bones. Hours later, an unexpected call brought David back to the real world. It was an old friend who worked at a law firm, someone who knew, without details, that something serious had happened. The news came raw, unadorned. Laura's boss had been removed from the board, not only because of the betrayal scandal, but also because, under internal pressure, he had revealed a network of abuses of power that had been going on for years. As a result, the entire reputation he had built fell like a house of cards at the first blow. Social networks were already buzzing, the company was racing against time to control the damage, and the two were at the center of a public storm that was growing by the minute. David hung up the phone with a mix of surprise and bitterness. There was something deeply ironic in seeing those who so valued appearances being devoured by the truth they tried to hide. It was as if, somehow, the universe had decided to balance the scales, even as he himself continued to carry the burden of his own disillusionment. He didn't take pleasure in their suffering, it wasn't revenge he was looking for. He just wanted to move forward, find a new path where he could rebuild himself away from the shadows of what was destroyed. Later that afternoon, David decided to go home, just to pick up some belongings. The environment that had once been the stage for his happiness now seemed cold and strange, as if the walls had absorbed the betrayal and now repelled him. He quickly collected clothes, documents, and some personal objects, avoiding looking at the photos, avoiding allowing the memories to chain him again. He was about to leave when he heard the door open and saw Laura standing there, her face devastated, her eyes empty. She begged for a conversation, for one last chance to explain, to justify the unjustifiable. David, too tired to resist, gave in. They sat across from each other in the living room, like two strangers forced to share one last moment of truth. Laura spoke at length, pouring out confessions that only made the betrayal even more bitter. She told how her approach to her boss had started innocently, how he had made her feel alive, desired, admired at a time when she herself felt invisible. She told about the furtive meetings, about the excuses, about the guilt that gnawed at her but was never strong enough to stop her. David listened to everything in silence, his face impassive. When she finished, she asked just one thing: if she had ever, in the midst of all that, thought about him, about the man who shared dreams with her. Laura tried to respond, but the words died in her throat. And in that moment, David knew there was nothing there that could be saved. He got up, picked up his backpack and, without looking back, left behind not just a home, but an entire life. As he walked through the door, a single tear silently ran down his face. Not for the woman he had lost, but for the man he had been, for the innocence that was gone forever. I knew I had a long road of reconstruction ahead of me, but I also knew, with a cutting certainty, that I would never accept less than I deserved again. That night would be the end of a painful chapter. And, unknown to David yet, it would also be the beginning of a new story, a story where he would discover that, even after being destroyed, it was still possible to flourish. The days that followed seemed to be diluted in a dense fog that David crossed with slow steps. He no longer carried the raw weight of fresh betrayal, but rather something subtler and deeper, the feeling of being uprooted from everything that had once been familiar to him. His home was now a small, impersonal hotel room, his meals were quick and tasteless, his nights were long and haunted by memories he couldn't shake. He didn't cry, he didn't scream, he didn't give in to impulses of anger. What he felt was a silent, heavy pain that invaded his bones, a mourning that was not for a person who had left, but for a love that had been murdered by the hands of the one he trusted most. There were times when he would find himself staring at the ceiling for hours, trying to understand at what point everything had started to deteriorate and why he was the last one to notice. Laura tried to contact us numerous times. Long, desperate messages arrived on his cell phone every day, some full of pleas, others of empty promises, and some, on her worst days, full of veiled accusations, trying to reverse the roles and make him question his decision. But David, even through pain, remained firm. I now understood that there were things that love, no matter how deep it was, could not repair. It was like a shattered crystal glass, no matter how much they tried to glue the pieces together, it would never go back to what it was. Trust was what sustained love, and without it, all that was left was a hollow structure ready to collapse at the slightest blow. There was, however, an internal tension that David could not ignore. Part of him wanted justice, wanted Laura to feel the full weight of the choices she had made. Another part, perhaps the most intimate and silent, just wanted peace. The big battle now was not against her, nor against the past, but against himself, against the primitive impulse of wanting to see her suffer in the same way. It was in this conflict that he silently drowned, trying to find a path that wouldn't turn him into something he despised. He didn't want to become bitter, he didn't want the betrayal to shape the man he could still be. It was during one of these sleepless mornings that David, impulsively, got in the car and drove to the old neighborhood where they lived. He parked a few blocks away from the house so as not to be seen. There was no plan, there was no objective, just an absurd need to revisit the scene of a life that no longer belonged to him. He walked slowly down the empty street, the cold biting his skin, and observed from afar the house lights still on. A figure crossed the room from one side to the other. Maybe Laura, maybe her own ghosts. David didn't come any closer. He understood there that he needed nothing in that place. Not the walls, not the furniture, not the memories. What he loved was no longer there, and in many ways, perhaps it never had been. On the way back to the hotel, he stopped at a 24-hour coffee shop. He ordered a strong coffee and watched the slow movement of the morning. It was there that he met a woman named Sophia. She was the late-night waitress, one of those people who carried in their eyes a story that didn't need to be said to be felt. There were no sparks, no romance at first sight, just a simple conversation about how cold it was, about how the night seemed longer when you were alone. Sophia was sweet without being saccharine, strong without being harsh, and there was an authenticity about her that contrasted violently with the duplicity David had experienced with Laura. He wasn't looking for anything, he wasn't looking for replacements for a lost love, but that night, in that exchange of simple words, he felt for the first time in a long time that there was still something alive inside him. Over the next few days, visits to the coffee shop became a silent ritual. There were no expectations, no promises, just two strangers sharing a small peace in the midst of the chaos. Sophia spoke little about herself, and David spoke even less. But it was enough. It was a reminder that not all human contact needed to be tainted by betrayal, that there were still souls capable of finding each other without destroying each other. Slowly, he began to reconstruct the contours of his identity, not as someone defined by pain, but as someone who had survived it. Meanwhile, Laura continued her spiral of self-destruction. News of his professional problems began to circulate. After the scandal, she had lost the position she had fought so hard to achieve. The lover had been fired, and the company, in its attempt to clean itself up, had made a point of cutting ties with everyone involved. Doors closed to her in other companies too. Social media, relentlessly, amplified the shame. Common friends disappeared, invitations stopped. The woman who had once been admired for her competence now walked among the wreckage of her own reputation. David knew all this indirectly. Old colleagues, acquaintances, sometimes blurted out information during casual conversations. But he didn't look for news. He was no longer a prisoner of what was happening to Laura. I no longer felt that cruel impulse to want her to suffer. What he felt now was a distant, almost impersonal sadness, like someone watching someone drown in a river whose waters they chose to enter. The moral dilemma that haunted David was different. He knew he could, if he wanted to, make her life even more miserable. She could disclose details that she still kept, she could take legal action that would drag her into bigger scandals. He had the power to take devastating revenge. But every time he considered that possibility, he felt contaminated, dirty. I didn't want to be defined by hate. He didn't want to carry the weight of revenge in his new life. So, in an act that required more strength than any other decision so far, David chose to let go of his bonds. He chose to let fate take its toll on her, if that was fair, and let himself find other ways to flourish. Sophia, without ever asking questions, became an unexpected pillar in this transition. Davi found in her a space where he could exist without masks, without fear. And, little by little, a genuine friendship began to emerge, tinged with a discreet tenderness that didn't need a rush to grow. He didn't know if he was ready to love again, but for the first time he felt like maybe at some point he could be. There were nights when, lying in the simple hotel bed, David thought about the future without feeling the usual tightness in his chest. I thought about trips I could still take, books I would still read, quiet cafes with Sophia and, perhaps, one day, a new home where the ghosts of the past would not find shelter. He thought about the possibility of a clean new beginning, free from the chains of pain, a new beginning that, although born of destruction, carried within it an almost sacred hope. And so, while Laura struggled to pick up the pieces of a life she herself shattered, David slowly walked out of her shadow, guided by the faint but true light of his own rediscovered strength. Autumn was slowly advancing, dyeing the streets with melancholic, golden tones. David's life, although still marked by the scars of betrayal, began to take on firmer, more defined contours. He had moved to a small rented apartment in a quiet neighborhood, far from the places that carried the weight of memories. It wasn't big, nor refined, but it had the cozy simplicity he needed so much. There, between bare walls that he little by little decorated with his own choices, David felt that he was, finally, regaining control of his own story. It was a new sensation, fragile as crystal, but undeniably real. Visits to the cafe continued, but over time they began to include impromptu walks in parks, slow walks through street markets, conversations that lasted into the early hours of the morning and, sometimes, the simple act of sharing the silence without rushing, without obligations. Sophia was a discreet breath of normality in a life that until recently seemed to have completely lost its way. She spoke about her dreams with a simplicity that touched David in ways he no longer thought possible. And when he smiled, that smile without artifice, it was as if the world briefly stopped hurting. One afternoon, as they walked along a trail of dry leaves in a remote park, Sophia stopped, staring at the peaceful lake ahead, and shared a heartbreaking piece of her story. He spoke of a broken engagement on the eve of the wedding, of broken promises, of a faith in love that had to be rebuilt almost from scratch. David listened to her in silence, feeling that there, in that vulnerability exposed without drama, there was an invisible bridge connecting them in a deeper way. When she finished, he just said that he understood more than he wanted to, and in the look they exchanged there was the silent understanding that neither of them sought to save the other, just to walk together without the intention of erasing the scars. While David's new life quietly took root, Laura faced a very different reality. Without a job, without her old friends, without the social prestige she so valued, she seemed to wander between desperate attempts to recover some part of what she had lost. One cold morning, as David was getting ready to leave the apartment for another day of work, his phone rang. The number was familiar, but he still hesitated before answering. On the other end of the line, Laura's voice came out shaky, broken in a way that not even tears could express. She didn't apologize, she didn't beg back, she didn't try to justify herself. She just asked to see him one last time, not for reconciliation, but to give him something that, according to her, belonged to him and that could help him close that chapter. David pondered for a few moments before accepting. He arranged the meeting in a discreet, neutral cafe, where the story he shared with her would seem like just a pale memory. He arrived early, chose a table away and waited. When Laura entered, the initial shock almost made him look away. She seemed smaller, as if her body had given up on the internal struggle it was waging. His eyes, once so vibrant, were dull, and his walk revealed the weight of months of carrying guilt without finding relief. She sat down in front of him without ceremony, without trying to revive past intimacies. Laura took a thick envelope out of her bag and placed it on the table between them. He said that inside were all the messages, photos, documents and conversations that would prove how upright David had always been, how much his name should never have been dragged through the mud along with the scandal. She said that she knew that, by releasing all that, she was exposing her own shame even more, but that she wanted, in some way, to give him back what she could no longer give back, his dignity. David didn't touch the envelope right away. He watched her for a long moment, feeling torn between residual anger and a bitter compassion that he no longer knew exactly where it came from. Laura, her voice breaking, said that she understood if he never wanted to see her again, that she knew that some betrayals were unforgivable, but that she needed to at least try one last act of honesty. She said that, deep down, she had always known that David was the best thing she would have in her life and that, precisely for that reason, he didn't deserve even the crumbs of an apology. David didn't respond immediately. He took the envelope, put it in his briefcase without even opening it, and just said that he hoped she would find a way to rebuild her own life without continuing to destroy other people's. They left the cafe in opposite directions, without hugs, without goodbyes, like two travelers who, after a devastating storm, knew that there was no longer a common path to follow. David walked through the cold streets feeling like he had somehow come to an end. He didn't feel victorious, he didn't take pleasure in her defeat. All he felt was the strange lightness of someone finally letting go of an anchor that was no longer serving any purpose other than dragging him to the bottom. Later that night, sitting on the couch in his apartment, David opened the envelope. He read every message, saw every photo, analyzed every piece of evidence that, if used, could not only clear his name, but also destroy once and for all what was left of Laura's image. For hours, he stood there, facing the weight of the power he now had in his hands. Could do it. It could guarantee that she would never again have the slightest chance of getting back on her feet. But deep down he knew that if he took that path, something essential in him would also be lost. I didn't want to be an avenger. I wanted to be someone who survived without having to step on other people's rubble. He kept the envelope in a drawer and decided he would never use its contents. It was more important for him to preserve who he had decided to be than to seek redress for the suffering of others. It was at that exact moment that he understood the real meaning of freedom. It was not being able to destroy those who hurt him, but being able to choose not to do so. It was, in short, the silent victory of those who managed to emerge from pain bigger, not smaller, than they were before. Time took its course. Sophia was still present, now closer, but without rushing, without demands. It was a light construction, based on the silent confidence that grew every day. David, little by little, allowed himself to smile without guilt, make modest plans, glimpse possibilities that previously seemed too distant. One late afternoon, sitting on a park bench while the sun turned the sky orange, Sophia lightly leaned her head on his shoulder. And David, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel afraid. He just felt peace. I knew I would still carry scars, that the memory of betrayal would still emerge in sleepless nights or in involuntary flashes. But he also knew that these marks would not define him. They were just reminders of how much he was capable of resisting. There would be no grandiose promises, no vows of eternal happiness. Just the daily decision to move forward, with dignity, with courage and, above all, with the certainty that I deserved much more than mutilated love. And as night fell, bringing with it the fresh smell of a new cycle, David closed his eyes and let himself be carried away by the simple and powerful feeling of finally being whole again. Time, in its inexorable march, tried to reorganize everything that had been torn apart that night. The wounds that seemed incurable began to slowly heal in David, not because the past had been forgotten, but because he had learned to carry the pain without allowing it to define him. In the months that followed, he consolidated his new life with firm and conscious steps, without rushing, without false shortcuts. The small apartment that had initially been an emergency shelter became a home full of new meanings. Each object he carefully chose, each detail he incorporated into the space, was a silent symbol that starting over was possible and that there was dignity in rebuilding oneself with patience and truth. Sophia, with her gentle and sincere presence, not only remained by David's side, but was also the constant reminder that love doesn't have to be grand to be true. It was in the small gestures, the carefree conversations and the silent trust that he found a form of happiness he thought he had lost forever. There were no explosive statements or promises full of drama, just the tacit commitment to walk side by side, respecting the scars and celebrating the small daily victories. On a golden afternoon, as they walked through a street fair, David took Sophia's hand naturally, and in that simple touch there was more love and meaning than in all the vows of the past. Meanwhile, Laura faced the reverse of every choice she had made. After the scandal that had engulfed her, the social spaces that she had previously frequented naturally were brutally closed to her. The doors to the job market, so difficult to conquer, remained closed despite their desperate attempts to start over in other cities, in other areas. She now carried a stigma that she could not erase and that followed her wherever she went, like an uncomfortable and implacable shadow. Without true friends and family support, he plunged into a painful process of self-evaluation. There were no more excuses, no one else to blame, just the merciless mirror of his own choices. She needed to confront not only what she had done to David, but what she had done to herself. For long months, he fought depression and isolation, trying to find, among the rubble of his collapsed life, some spark of redemption. Laura's boss, once so confident and arrogant, saw his career decimated overnight. In addition to being fired, he faced internal lawsuits and was cited in investigations that revealed unethical practices in the company. He lost credibility in the corporate world, and the few who still reached out to him did so only out of momentary interests. His wife, strong and determined, moved forward alone, raising her son without looking back. They built a life far from scandals, far from bitterness, and, despite the difficulties, she would become for the boy a mother who chose dignity over humiliation. The boss, on the other hand, sank in small, frustrated attempts to rebuild his image, but the mark of his fall preceded him everywhere, making him a bitter reminder of how pride and betrayal can destroy what seemed unshakable. David, aware of this entire web of consequences, stayed away. Not out of indifference, but out of wisdom. He knew that true victory was not the ruin of others, but the ability to move forward without carrying the weight of revenge or bitterness. Instead of looking back, he looked at the present that he was rebuilding day after day and at the future that, although uncertain, now seemed promising in a way it never had before. He made new friends, resumed old forgotten hobbies, and rediscovered joy in small, everyday achievements. He learned that happiness does not come from the absence of pain, but from the conscious choice not to be a slave to it. One cold night, sitting with Sophia in front of the fireplace in a small country house they had rented for a weekend, David realized something fundamental: everything he had experienced, all the pain he had endured, all the suffering that seemed unbearable, had been, in a way, the silent forging of a new version of himself. Stronger, more aware, more true. Sophia watched him in silence, as if she felt the weight of that thought without it needing to be said. And in that moment, between the gentle crackle of burning wood and the peaceful warmth that enveloped them, David understood that he had finally crossed over to the other side of pain, to the side where life, however imperfect, was deeply, immensely beautiful. Laura, in turn, after many months of internal struggle, decided to start over in a radical way. She moved to a distant city, where no one knew her, and began working simple jobs, far from the glitter and pomp that had blinded her before. It was a difficult life, without the luxuries she was used to, but it was also a life without masks, where every small achievement was imbued with genuine pride. She still carried regret like an invisible tattoo, but little by little she learned to live with it, without it paralyzing her. I knew I could never erase what I had done, but I also knew that I could choose not to repeat the same mistakes. It was a cruel but necessary learning experience. And so, each of those involved followed their path, marked by the choices they made, shaped by the inevitable consequences that those choices entailed. There were no perfect endings, no supernatural punishments. There was only life, with its subtle and relentless justice, exacting the price of every decision made without conscience. And in the end, that's what made it all so deeply human. If you've made it this far, I want to know your honest opinion about this story. What did you think of the character choices? Which part impacted you the most? Leave your comment, I really want to know what you think. Also take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, because there are still many intense stories like this coming out. And never forget, this channel does not support any type of betrayal. The stories are fiction, created to show how betrayal destroys lives and leaves deep marks that can never be erased. Thank you very much for following along this far, and we'll see you in the next story.